Mike Kaye, Charlotte Observer, joining us now on the Eastern Automotive Group hotline. Is this the best time of the year to be a beat writer? Joe, you used to be a beat writer. It is coaching search season.
The NFL is an entirely different beast, and Mike does it as good as anybody. So I'm not even going to pretend, but I did love a coaching search.
So it's interesting. I've covered, I think this is my fourth or fifth coaching search. I've never covered a GM search. I've never had to.
Okay.
What I find is the GM stuff, it's a crapshoot. It's really hard to weigh in on a lot of stuff because there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. Unless you talk to people around the league, you're not, there's no, like if it's an assistant GM or a player personnel guy, a lot of people have like stuff to weigh in there, right? Like it's like, there's a lot in that pot. Coaching, it's a little bit different. You can see if a guy was a really good play caller. You can see if he had success that way. So that's new for me. 2 head coaching searches in 2 off seasons when you have an infant kid. And yeah, that's not something I was looking forward to. I thought I was going to go on leave in January and
Panthers had other plans, although you kind of had a sense of how this was going because the season wasn't getting any better. So you knew how this was going to go. All right, let's start backwards. Let's go backwards and then go forward with the firing of Scott Fitterer. And there's a lot of conversation as to what exactly Scott Fitterer did with an involved owner, how much of his decisions were actually his decisions, and how much of that was a Matt Rule decision or a David Tepper decision, X, Y, Z. So, and if you could kind of put a bow on the Scott Fitterer tenure as general manager, a man who said, we want to be in on every deal. Well, how much of it was him involved with these deals?
Well, I think ultimately it's everything's under his umbrella, right? But, if your boss wants something, which technically Matt Rule had final say his first 2 years here, it was abundantly clear when you looked at who he cut after training camp this year, who were his guys and who were not his guys. I think, Brandon Smith was an athletic guy who fit the athletic profile that Matt Rule liked. I think Shi Smith was a guy that I felt the entire offseason like he was kind of on shaky ground. There were, of the guys selected from 2021 to 2022, only 9 of the 17 players are still employed by the team, and one of them was on the practice squad. Look, I think the CMC trade doesn't get made unless the owner is all for it. He's the face of your franchise. And I've said this several times. I think the return they got for him was very good pre-using the picks, but they are magic beans. And so it doesn't matter what type of draft picks you got in return for a guy if you use them to essentially draft Jonathan Mingo and DJ Johnson. I've written about this several times. Day 2 of the draft was one of the worst processes I've ever seen covering an NFL draft. And I started as a draft analyst in the industry. So there was a lot, but I mean, it all kind of falls on him, whether your coaching staff is terrible at evaluating personnel, which by the way, from the outside looking in, Rule and Reich both had pretty tough times with their personnel and figuring out how to use them. I think DJ Chark playing X receiver is a massive malfunction of understanding what your talent is. He's a Z receiver who needs to be, given some space. He's not a press beater. That's just not him. Jonathan Mingo playing Z receiver when he's really a slot receiver, but you have Adam Thielen who you don't want to move out of the slot because he's the only guy that can catch a football. Like there was a lot going on here. The staff was very big on Miles Sanders. I think ultimately what this bogs down to is it's great to be a collaborator and a consensus builder, which is what Scott's known as around the league. But at some point as the GM, you have to have the awareness to say, no, we're not doing that. That doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And I think that was his biggest problem. We know the old adage, nice guys finish last. Well,
So, Mike, the last time we talked to you, you talked about what the structure could look like for the Panthers, and you had suggested that they probably need like a VP of football operations who's kind of in charge of everything, and then there's the GM who kind of handles the contracts and the daily stuff, and then obviously the coach. as the Panthers are remade this offseason. Do you see them going in that direction, or will it be more of a traditional GM, coach, owner type deal?
I think it depends on the GM that they hire, right? I think like if you're going to retain Dan Morgan, you need somebody who really understands the other side of the pillow, so to speak, of running a front office. He's a true personnel man, former player, like, you know, he's not a salary cap guy. There's nothing to that. And I think what's interesting is if you look at like Nick Mateo from the Ravens, if you look at Brant Tillis from the Chiefs, if you look at Alec Hallaby from the Eagles, those are all, you know, quote unquote nerds. Like those guys are numbers dudes. Like that's what vibes with David Tepper. And so I think if you put somebody as EVP of football operations, that doesn't mean they necessarily have to be a football czar. It just means that they help run the business. Like when you're an EVP of football operations, you're also dealing with marketing, you're dealing with PR, you're dealing with all this stuff. If you want your GM to be a true personnel guy, like in the old school manner, and let him cook, you need him to not worry about all that other stuff. Now, Samir Solomon has been here. He negotiates contracts. It is interesting that they are talking to the nerds or whatever you want to call them, instead of like there are some personnel guys. Brandon Brown is a very, very, very legitimate candidate. Champ Kelly it looks really, really good. I got a lot of pushback the other day for saying what he did in his interim stint looked impressive. But when you're an interim head coach, you typically work with the GM even more than you normally would, and you make decisions together. Think about it. They benched Jimmy Garoppolo for a rookie, and then they played well. They got rid of several veterans that were McDaniels guys. Like, that's impressive. You need to be able to go outside the norm, and I think that's what he did there. I think when you look at some of the guys they didn't interview, they didn't request at least initially, Ian Cunningham, Adam Peters, those are guys who have interviewed for other jobs here before, and both of them are considered two of the better candidates from an executive standpoint. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe they'll look at them down the road. Maybe they got the sense, like there's been a thing with Adam Peters. I've seen it reported that a lot of the times they just think he's going to go back to San Francisco. And so maybe Tepper did not want to waste some time there. But I think from a GM perspective, I would hire the GM first if you could, unless it's Ben Johnson who you really want. And they did not put in a request for Ray Agnew, who is the assistant GM in Detroit.
Wolfblood.
Who is an NC State alum who has played in the league. I mean, he's kind of like an older version of Dan Morgan in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see what they do. There's what I like to call the Shanahan Collective, where it's like a bunch of guys represented by Richmond Flowers, who, you know, has worked with Kyle Shanahan extensively, Frank Smith, Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, those guys who all kind of have like a Shanahan influence in their offense. Maybe they like a guy who is kind of under the radar, and maybe it's not Peters.
So here's you mentioned Ben Johnson, and I know they put out this big list of guys that they're going to be talking to, and I'm not going to reel off all the names. It's like 10 different guys. It's Ben Johnson's name keeps coming up, and Ben Johnson was somebody that was attached to the Carolina Panthers last year. And with all these other job openings, he is somebody that is going to be looked at by these other teams. So is he the number one target? Is he the guy that the Panthers ultimately want?
That seems to be the case. I mean, no one's outright said it to me, but everybody brings up him first.
Okay.
Who I talk to. He is a guy who obviously is from Asheville, went to UNC, very smart, worked his way up the Detroit, ladder in coaching. He survived a couple of different coaching tenures there. And he's done a really good job those first 2 years as a play caller. That said, and I've said this on your show before, when you give somebody who is a play caller the head coaching job, you're giving them 75% more responsibility. Oh, and then you're asking them to still call plays.
Sure.
And I think we saw with Frank Reich from an operational standpoint, it's really difficult to do that. Andy Reid is really the one guy who has shined through as a play caller, an executive type, but also his in-game decision making has been questioned. His big thing in Philly was situational awareness, and he's gotten better at that, mainly because he is the best quarterback on the planet. In my opinion, he is a top 2 head coach of his era. I mean, I don't even think that's an opinion. I think that's fact. And, I think it's really tough to replicate that. So you're going to take a 37 or 38-year-old and ask them to do the same thing. I don't know if I can barely tie my shoes and I'm 36. So like, it's one of those things where like, I just think be careful what you wish for with this young up and coming group. I think one of the guys that appeals to me is Frank Smith because he is more of a play designer and CEO type. Mike McDaniel calls the plays. It's his offense in Miami, but Frank Smith does so much behind the scenes, I've been told. His players love him. To me, he makes a lot of sense because you're not asking him to go in a bunch of different directions. You're letting somebody run the offense. You're letting somebody run the defense. You have your Shanahan influences. And he can focus on everything else in between. He's got an O-line background. He's got a tight end background. I think, and he's been in the NFL for several years. So it's not like you're going to make the comparison to Matt Rule. You're not going to make the comparison to Frank Reich outside of their first names. Like, I do think there's some interest there, but if you are going to hire a first-year head coach, you better hire somebody with a lot of front office experience.
19 of the last 21 years, we've seen the team go from worst to first. I realize there's a college mentality, I think, for people looking at the Panthers right now to think, oh man, they're Temple football. They'll never be back.
2 years away from being 2 years away.
It's so far away.
Yeah.
But I look at it and people got mad at me on Twitter.
I don't see how you see it. They don't have draft picks.
I made the comp to the Texans. Now the Texans got a couple of things right.
Yeah.
But a couple of years ago, the Texans looked lost, Mike. Sure. Like the owner was problematic. The quarterback didn't want to play for the problematic owner. They couldn't get anything right. They had idiot Bill O'Brien running around, and they gave him all of this control. And now, voila! Look at where the Texans are. I'm not saying it's going to happen next year for the Panthers, but do you and or people who follow the NFL really think that the Panthers are that far off?
Well, if we're going to talk about Houston, they fired 2 head coaches before they got to DeMeco Ryans, and DeMeco Ryans really wanted to go there specifically because he had family there. He had been a legacy player there. There was, I mean, I don't want to say they lucked into CJ Stroud, but the choice was made for them, right? Like there was a lot going on there, right? What I would say is this team from the outside looking in has an owner who is quick on the trigger, who now doesn't have a first overall pick. If you didn't like Bryce Young and weren't willing to make the same deal that they were, you probably don't want this job, or it's not a good fit for you. The offense needs to be completely rebuilt outside of the 33-year-old wide receiver and Bryce Young. The offensive line might, there's some realness to the Icky to guard situation. That's very
all I'm hearing from Mike is, yeah, dude, no.
Well, here, let me put it in perspective too. It gets even worse. Your top 2 players on defense, who are your top 2 players probably on your team outside of Derrick Brown, are free agents. One of them is going to need a skyrise type contract. The other is going to be one of the more complicated contracts in Frankie Louvu because he plays basically 4 different positions. It's tough, man. Like they do have a lot of cap space, but when you look at who has more, it's a pretty deep list.
Yeah.
And I just think something that somebody told me who represents coaches is that they're going to have a tough time filling out a staff because while assistant coaches are given guaranteed contracts, they have offset language. And so let's say you're a young coach who's moving his young family from LA or Seattle or Las Vegas or Denver to Charlotte. If there's another quick trigger move or he doesn't like how a certain position group is working, yeah, sure, you've got that guaranteed money, but you're a young coach. You don't want to be out of it. There's a stigma that if you're out of the league for a year or 2, you're in trouble. And from there, it has offset language. So let's say, yeah, cool, you get fired in Charlotte, but you Arizona's got an opening and you get hired. Well, you're paying for all this moving and uprooting your family and creating a little bit of strife there. And so I think you're going to see that while they had the all-star staff, whatever that means this year, it's going to be a little bit more complicated in bringing in proven guys to, I mean, look, Arizona had the same issue. Like they had a first-year offensive coordinator, first-year defensive coordinator. Their staff wasn't particularly impressive. And they did a relatively good coaching job, but, it's going to take time. I think they're really looking to compete in 2025. That's when their salary cap just like explodes. And what the plan would be from the outside looking in is to sign guys to bonuses, like really big contracts this year, with it kind of set up with dummy years, with it pushed into next year. You get down to the, not to get too in the salary cap minutia, but give them a huge signing bonus, make their salaries basically at the minimum you can do it, and then take on those charges the next couple of years. So you're taking from next year to help this year. But even then, yes, money at the end of the day is the big deal.
Do they even have their second, third, and fourth picks?
Yeah, they have their second. Okay. Yeah. So 33.
Right. Show me a good team, Mike, as you know, and I'll show you a team that hit on their second, third, and fourth round picks.
Right. And look, what's interesting is Scott Fitterer came from Seattle, where they were terrible with first round picks, but terrific with second, third, and fourth round picks, which also makes it very curious why that didn't happen here. I think
almost like there's bigger problems with the Carolina Panthers.
Look, the third round pick, DJ Johnson, they literally admitted right after picking him is there was a run on pass rushers, and he was like their last draftable. And if you watch the Panthers in-house media stuff, we won the trade from the trade chart, but winning the trade on the trade chart doesn't matter if you draft a guy who's an edge rusher who can't edge rush, who's 25 and is just learning the position.
Wait, Chandler Zavala wasn't at the combine. Is anybody going to take him? He texted us. We should take him.
Totally take him.
Never mind that he wasn't any good in college.
Well, I'll push back on that. I really like Chandler Zavala. I think that he eventually can be very good.
Eventually,
this was the biggest nightmare of a season I've ever seen for a player. I cannot remember
in the fourth round. Was it the fourth round?
Yeah, but he had a serious next
round.
Yeah. Look, I think he is very raw when you play it like the school he played for before NC State. It's a tough beat, man. They moved him around. He didn't have a training camp. Like, there's a lot going on there. But what I will say is, like, Jonathan Mingo, I was like, here's the thing. This is the problem with this organization the last 3 years is compounded mistakes. So if I can take you through a little bit of a timeline, I know we're
I like it.
Up against it.
No, I like it.
So in 2022, the rule staff is enamored with Matt Corral. So they trade up in the third round, trade their future third round pick.
Yeah, actual assets. Yes.
Right. Okay. Let's fast forward to this year. Okay. They trade Christian McCaffrey. The second round pick's the 61st overall pick. Oh, great. This will help us save the 39th overall pick by trading that along for Bryce Young, get the number 1 overall pick. The 39th overall pick is a gem. It's a top 40 pick. It's basically got first round value. So what do you do if you're a smart organization when you only have you come into a draft with only 6 draft picks? You trade back because you have several needs. Well, didn't do that. Drafted Jonathan Mingo, a slot receiver who has Anquan Bolden-like traits, but his best year was like 800 yards. Who also, by the way, was like injured relentlessly during his time at Ole Miss. Then, and by the way, 2 picks before B.J. Ojulari, who's a pass rusher. Then you realize, oh my God, all these pass rushers are coming off the board. Man, it would have been great to have this year's third round pick that was like in the mid 60s. Oh, wait, you don't have him because Matt Corral's the trade with the Patriots. So you say to yourself, hey, let's trade up. We have a third and a fourth round pick from the McCaffrey trade. Pass rushers are a premium position. Let's trade both of those. Trades up with that to number 80 and drafts DJ Johnson. Here's the issue there. You have created a problem because, one, you traded up for Matt Corral, who didn't play a game for this franchise.
Snap, right?
Mm-hmm. Nope. And And then you didn't trade back. Well, if you would have traded back, you probably would have acquired another 3rd round pick to draft DJ Johnson.
Here's my premise for the Panthers. They have made every absolute wrong move.
Yeah.
Starting with Matt Rule and let's take everybody on defense in the draft. That'll be great. Look at our strategy. We're so smart. Let me take JC Horn instead of Justin Fields when he's just sitting there staring at us. Like, they've made all of these mistakes, all of them. And the one thing that they used to be really good at was drafting in the 1st round. Now they're not even good at drafting in the 1st round. So if you can just hit this little reset button and have competent adults, I'm telling you, and if Mike, not to insult Mike, but if Mike can figure this out,
if these jabronis on this podcast
just so you
figure
know,
it out,
if Mike can figure it out, then everybody else can too.
Mike Kaye, Charlotte Observer.
I mean, wow, what a high bar you set,
right? Right? I mean, it's kind of a theme with what we do. We all got it figured out, yet we don't have the jobs. Anyway, Mike Kaye, Charlotte Observer, we appreciate the time. We'll catch up with you next week, man, because I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of movement.
Yeah, you got nothing going on. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry.
There's nothing. My schedule's free.
Your schedule's totally free. We'll work something out. We'll get an update. We'll talk to you later, man.